Turley and Alex Zhang. They're going to be talking about what does it mean to now work for a DAO. This kind of sparked off as a discussion from chatting with Cooper, where he has been part of so many DAOs that I feel like the timing is right to talk about what does it mean now for somebody to be employed by a DAO? What does it mean to work full-time, or to say that you're working with the DAO and the challenges and the tooling and everything else around that world? So it's going to be a pretty active discussion, and I'll let all of them do most of the talking. So without further ado, let's welcome Cooper, Gaby, and Alex.
Thank you so much, Kartik. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excited to have you.
Hey, Gaby, Alex, how are we feeling today?
Hey.
Great. Thanks so much.
Ready to kick off this beautiful Friday morning talking about working for DAOs, huh? No better time.
Cheers to that.
Nice. So guys, I know that we have a pretty extensive amount of area that we can cover here. I want to keep this more casual today. I want it to feel very natural and basically just help people understand what does our day-to-day look like. You know, I think a lot of the time I get questions about DAOs, and conceptually it makes sense. You're in a Discord server, you're hanging out with people, but I think more of the mysterious part of working for DAOs is what this actually looks like behind the scenes. You know, I hope that after this conversation, people listening can walk away with, you know, what would this look like if I were to try and go work for a DAO full time? You know, how would this compare to working for another crypto project, maybe working for a Web2 company in the past? And hopefully just try and give some more clarity to what this looks like. But before we do that, I want to kick it off with some intros. Maybe I'll start with Gaby and then send it over to Zhang. Would you guys mind just giving a quick background on, first and foremost, you know, your first DAO experience, and then maybe a little bit more what you're working on today and how this ties into working for DAOs tomorrow?
Yeah, awesome. I'm trying to think if this counts as my first DAO experience. Cooper, maybe you can give me some thoughts here with the Bright Moments DAO. I think that counts as my first experience.
Absolutely.
The experience that brought me full-time into crypto and getting me so excited about this space, which I'll talk about in a second, was with a community originally based in Los Angeles called Bright Moments, which started as a physical NFT art gallery in Venice. And if you wanted to come mint an NFT at the gallery, you had to come in person and kind of go through this experience one-on-one of sitting down with the organizers of the DAO, learning about the project, understanding their goals for the community, and then you can mint one and join the community. And everyone has gone through the same process to get one of those NFTs. And so the community is incredibly strong because there's this shared sense of ownership and background and belonging in this community that spans these physical and digital walls, which I think is really special. So spending time in that community, you know, I was going to that gallery so often. That's how I met Cooper. It's how I really got so excited about the space. And that's what prompted me to leave my job in Web2 and join full-time, kind of pushing forward this new frontier of consumer software. So what I do now is I'm an investor at TCG. We're a decade-plus-year-old firm that invests in digital consumer, and we've done so successfully over the past decade and been very thematically driven. And so we invested early in OpenSea, in The Athletic, Twitter, Pandora, and now really incredible communities like Barstool Sports, Crunchyroll, Exploding Kittens. TCG started driving a lot of conviction in the crypto space, believing that this is the next big horizon for consumer. And obviously I feel the same way. So I mentioned OpenSea. We also invested in Dapper Labs, led the Series A and Z run. So now I've just recently joined the team to focus on investing earlier in crypto at this intersection of consumer and blockchain, trying to really identify the on-ramps or the companies trying to bring in the next 10 or 100 million users in the space.
Amazing. Zhang, what are you working on these days, man?
Hey, everyone. I'm Alex Zhang. A lot of the homies call me Zhang. My first DAO experience is still my main DAO experience. It stole my heart quite early on, and I'm still deep in the game there. That's Friends with Benefits. I always say that I was recently sort of pilled or brought into the Web3 space only about 6 months ago. I was previously working in different various community organizations, always at the intersection of culture and technology, whether it was running radio stations or running sort of startup accelerator programs, always interested in how different people with different backgrounds could come together, what that sort of overlap space looked like, and what were the innovations that were sort of come when people met with sort of different backgrounds and different perspectives. That led me to an organization called Summit Series, which was a global community company of about 25,000 members around the world, where we hosted festivals, conferences, events, and our most notable project was coming together as a community and fundraising to purchase a crowdfunding to purchase a ski resort in Utah that was going bankrupt, that we then turned into sort of a physical place where we all spent the last 5 years, sort of living together, collaborating together, and in a site where we hosted most of our conferences. But that was all within this Web 2 framework. And I saw a lot of the challenges that community organizations faced that were just limited by Web 2, right? Lack of transparency, lack of things not being on chain, the idea of like, you know, value accrual to a corporate entity as opposed to value accrual to a community, to the actual you know, the users or the members. And so it was Web3 and sort of more specifically the DAO framework that really opened my eyes into all new frameworks in which to organize and bring people together and to create value for the entire equation or the entire pie. That then led me to discover Friends with Benefits, where I got to meet Cooper and Trevor and a whole bunch of other members who sort of started Friends with Benefits, where I now spend almost all of my time leading strategy and operations as sort of was the first sort of full-time, you know, head of community to really distill sort of a vision and a product roadmap and really take what I think a lot of internet communities possess this day, which is sort of lightning in a bottle overnight, right? Like a sort of fractionalized NFT, you know, purchase or an immediate DAO that spun up over a specific cause. But I see a lot of the work is in the tail end of actually taking that energy and creating organizational structure around it so that a team can come together and harmonize and build over a longer period of time, which is specifically what I spend my time at Friends with Benefits doing.
Nice. And I want to stick on that for a second because you were the first full-time hire from Friends with Benefits. You know, I think now at this point we have close to 10 to 15 paid roles on a monthly basis, but I'm really curious to hear when you were entering this space, you know, having no prior Web3 experience, what was that conversation like to sort of flesh out like a formal paid role from a DAO, you know, relative to having not really been involved in crypto deeply before that? Like, what did that conversation look like? How did you feel about that? Can you walk us through sort of your state of mind entering that conversation?
Yeah, I think the crypto industry at large, I think had, at least from the perspective I came from as being a relative outsider, it has a lot of PR and branding work that needs to be done collectively, right? As all of us who now, let's say, work in crypto, and everyone now who works in crypto, I think would agree that crypto isn't even necessarily an industry, right? It's an underlying infrastructure that can affect like every single industry. But I think a lot of education needs to be done. And yet the media isn't 100% on our side of like how they tell these stories. But I think the first thing that I was sort of processing was, what does it actually mean to sort of work or be affiliated in crypto, right? So I think that takes finding incredible spaces like Bright Moments, like Friends with Benefits, like all these different projects, and beyond that feel like they're working on that longer tail horizon and sort of stepping around a lot of, let's say, like the ICO narrative that dominated, you know, a couple of years ago, or sort of these different branding mechanics that didn't really serve, I think, the industry at large. So I think first was figuring out where I sat in relationship to the overall space, and then there was just like the basic, you know, mechanics of like, okay, what does it look like to transition from Web to, I think frameworks even, right? Like how does salaries, you know, the concept of equity that vests over many years if you work at a startup. I think this narrative that a lot of, you know, people over the last 20 years who joined sort of the startup Silicon Valley grind of like, I'm going to join early employee at a startup, I'm going to like try to grab as much equity as I can in this company, that those sort of I think parameters that you know, the zero sum game, I think, of startup world and Silicon Valley world, it was just really interesting to traverse into Web3, where so much of those paradigms and those frameworks exist in totally different contexts, which was really exciting. So even understanding how, you know, paying in token, you know, how earning tokens as contributing to a DAO was something that I had sort of never thought of before. I think even the notion of contributing and being locked in one specific company full time, where, right, startups are very much like, oh, everything you create here is IP owned by this company, you need to give everything your attention. I think DAOs really favor and where the future of work is going is skilled laborers and contributors working for handfuls of different DAOs based on their specific skill index. And so for mine, it was organizational design and leadership and community building, and being able to take that and bake that into FWB, which just required all my bandwidth, but eventually supporting with that function with other DAOs. So it's almost like fractionalizing your specific skill set, and DAOs have made it so much easier to contribute to things versus like the traditional like company of going through HR, multiple interviews, like that whole narrative of Web 2 recruiting. I think in Web 3 has just greased those wheels a lot better. And so joining these organizations, I think has also been simplified to an extent, and also the ways to contribute have been amplified as well.
Yeah, and I want to zoom in there because I think it's really interesting the way that you joined FWB. You know, it wasn't like overnight you rocked up to the Discord channel and then you're like, okay, I want a salary for a full-time position and I want a bunch of tokens, yes or no vote on Snapshot. You know, I think it was a much more iterative process than that. You know, from my perspective, you had a close friend in Trevor who was very actively involved in the DAO. At that point in time, we had a close working group that was running as staff basically, but it was very loose and informal. And at that point in time, I think we all recognized that we needed someone to be full-time on this. And so rather than you just diving in and being full-time on day one, there's a very much iterative process of starting with the small USDC allocation, you know, coming on part-time and really ingraining yourself in the community. And as you sort of found that to be comfortable, you know, found out like who was working on what, who are the key operators that I should be aware of, you know, what areas can I collaborate people, where can I slot in? I think at that point in time, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say it was like 1 month to 2 months in when you were like, all right, I'm ready to actually do this full time. And at that point, I think it was working with, you know, people like myself, Trevor, to really like flesh out what that role looks like more definitively, and then start having those conversations about USDC salary versus token vest over here, and kind of modeling a more traditional compensation package that I think in the DAO world might seem weird on the surface, that it, you know, resembles such a traditional employment structure in a lot of ways. But would love for you to just talk through, you know, how did you feel about that leaving your Web2 job where you had a really amazing position locked in, you had amazing compensation. You know, I know that there was a lot of you're like, hey, what are these tokens that I'm getting? Like, what is up with this? You know, like I'm getting a lot of internet tokens. Like, these things even have value? What's going on here? Like, would love to just hear about that very quick transition from Web 2 compensation package to Web 3, like really just YOLOing it, like trusting that it was going to work out.
Yeah. So I think the most relevant thing to this community and this audience would even be, I guess, that let's say that 1 to 2, 3 month period where you're really, I always call it the first date before you get married, which is sort of the figuring out if there's a cultural fit and a skill set fit for the DAO that you're looking to contribute to. And so, yeah, I think that early process is incredibly important. I believe that right now across the DAO landscape, that barrier needs to be significantly lowered, and it needs to be easier for people who express interest to dive in and be able to start contributing, picking up tasks, and essentially proving to the community at large that they're the right cultural fit and that they have the sort of right alignment of skill set. And so that's what I did, right? I came in and I wasn't immediately like, hey, everyone, I'm full-time and I'm the leader. Like, you know, in these network leadership models, those types of leaders don't succeed. I think for me in that 2 to 3 months, it was about coming in and listening was kind of what I explained first, was like sitting there and like Coop, I don't even think we've even talked about this, but like that first 2 months, I did probably like 6 to 7 phone calls a day of DAO community members. Anyone I saw that was posting that I thought had like merit or value or had an interesting take, specifically the people who were critiquing how we were running things, I would reach out, quickly introduce myself and ask to get on a quick Discord chat. And I was just banging out, 15, 20-minute calls a day, building sort of repertoire or rapport with this community and understanding and listening, hey, what were their biggest frustrations and what were those sort of needs that needed to be met? And so I think that's where any community manager who's looking to break into the DAO space or Web3, the first thing is really joining a community, hopping over that hopefully lower barrier to entry and like listening and spending time in a DAO, and then figuring out where your skill sets can specifically plug in. In terms of the specific, let's say Web 2 to Web 3 compensation package leap, there's no, like, just like in Web 2, there's no like clear cut formula to be able to like replicate. But I would say a framework I use is now we're onboarding new part-time to full-time contributors like every week. I always say it's not about the first negotiation, it's about the second. Just like get your foot in the door and like start contributing, right? I always like think of, if anyone's ever hired people here, think of like how hard it is to prescribe an immediate value set to that individual if you haven't worked with them over an extended period of time, and you're kind of like shooting in the dark, which is what I think a lot of Web 2 was. It was like competition of like, you were making X at this big tech company, and so I'm going to match this plus 10% plus X more equity. I think that sort of like the inflated, let's say, compensation rates of Silicon Valley is quite dangerous. And at least in Web 3, I always say, it's not the first negotiation, it's your second. Come in, get something that like makes you feel equal and valued. But then as you prove value, you then will have as a contributor significantly more leverage to be able to then ask for something that you feel like your worth and your value. I'm all for having, contributors advocate for their contribution value. But I think it's about, it's getting your foot in the door, listening, and then working with the existing team and the community at large, because everything is taken through proposals, once you've proven the value, it's a lot easier for a community to vote on like, hey, we think you're worth this, whatever, salary, token schedule, et cetera.
It's amazing. And thank you for diving deep on that. I think a lot of the times it's conceptually easy to say I work for a DAO, but like really painting that color around what that looks like and that ramp up process is very helpful to people. So Gaby, I want to go over to you here. I think that you're in an interesting spot where obviously your MO is you're an investor, but the one thing that I respect about your work is it's not like you're just coming in and like, hey, where can I put money into this? You know, it's very much like an iterative process, being hands-on with these communities. You know, I see you writing a lot about these subjects. I see you kind of in the weeds on the Discord. How do you see your role sort of in the wider DAO landscape? And when you think about joining a DAO, you know, what's the frame of mind that you take as you go into those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess some background on myself is I've always been really, really deeply curious about how we interact with technology. So I studied philosophy and computer science in school, thought a lot about how do you grow and scale social computing systems, anything from, you know, Wikipedia to Facebook. And I've done a lot of thinking over the past couple of years of what the future might look like in tech, in digital culture, in media, and in community. And particularly over the past year, realized I was just naturally gravitating towards crypto solutions. And so it wasn't this moment where I woke up and decided, okay, I want to work in crypto, but I just ended up finding myself there because I wanted to join the most interesting communities online. And it ended up being a lot of these niche Discord servers. I think Zhang is totally right that the path to contribution is a little bit blurry now. And luckily for us, there are already solutions being created to help that. Even how I met Zhang is I wrote a piece about like something around social tokens that I thought was flawed. And exactly like you said, he reached out and we got on a call and we talked about it. And we talked about what a better onboarding might look like. I've joked before that there should be like a fraternity rush process for DAOs, where you kind of get sort of a bird's eye view of what the community stands for and what it's about. And you can see if it might be a fit, as opposed to focusing on financial upside by buying your way in or other things like that. So for me, I focused on how I like spending my time and where I like to contribute. A good example is I'm a member of Forefront, a media and publishing DAO where you can help to write and edit and distribute pieces of content around crypto media. So that's been a way for me to get involved. And I think for me, kind of what I stand for in this ecosystem is speaking to two audiences, really. So the one audience I speak to is crypto natives, people who spend really like every waking moment of their lives in this world, like you guys, to remind them of how people outside the space operate. Because I kind of bridge this world being at a traditional investment firm. And then the other audience I speak to is people outside of crypto to show how and why this space is for them too. And so a lot of the work that I focus on is promoting these projects that I care about that have really strong communities and showing people how they can get involved as well. And so I try to walk the walk and not just kind of pontificate from the sidelines.
Yeah, and how does your, personal involvement in the space differ from your professional involvement as an investor? Do you think that there's a difference between how you're interacting with DAOs on a day-to-day as Gaby versus as, a professional investor? Or do you think that they're more or less one and the same these days?
It's a really interesting question that I haven't really personally reflected on. To me, it feels pretty similar, where as an investor, I'm incentivized for the companies I fund to succeed, and I want to get involved, right? And so the best investors have like a real significant value add. And same with joining a DAO, it's like you're quite incentivized with the platform or community itself. And so Zhang was saying kind of like in Web 2, it's a little bit of a zero-sum game. And that's why I think on that compensation note, I would caution against trying to compare a Web 2 model of compensation to a Web 3 one, because they really are fundamentally different from the ground up. In Web 2 communities, as a user, not necessarily as an investor, but as a user, we've seen as communities or platforms grow in Web 2, they become increasingly misaligned with what users actually want. And that's just, how it's structured from the ground up. It's no fault of the users or of the people who run those platforms. But in crypto, when users are, aligned with these platforms or communities from the ground up, as they grow, they become larger and more resilient, and the users actually become more incentivized over time to innovate and create new technology. And so it's really exciting. I think it actually blurs the lines between what an investor is and what a user is. I think everyone is an owner now, and that's how it always should have been. And so it's a new era in how people engage and interact and transact online. And so it's just exciting to see the blue ocean of opportunity in the space, and a lot of people who have never been accredited investors before, never been in a position like mine, who now get to do, the same work that I get to do and add so much incredible value to the space.
That's exactly right. And Zhang, the one thing that I want to call out from our dinner last night is it's wild to me how fast you are now regarded as someone who's like a leader in the DAO space. You know, it's been 6 months. Obviously, you're working for a killer community. Could you just talk a little bit about sort of this, from your mind, the fact of having been completely new 6 months ago to now people tagging you with tweets being like top mind in the DAO space? Like, how do you think you came into that position? And what's kind of the key takeaway there for other people that are looking to get involved?
I think to my earlier point regarding crypto as not being an industry, but as being this underlying infrastructure, I think is an incredibly specific thing to, I think, pay attention to and listen to, right? And by saying that, I mean, crypto fundamentally, or blockchain or DAO, like all these, like if we extract all of those into the like the first principles of like what all this means, right? Like distribution, decentralization, community ownership. These frameworks, I think, can be applied to like literally every single industry. And so if you think of it in that Venn diagram, it's like, what are you bringing from, if this circle is blockchain technology, whatever the biggest bucket, and this circle is like the specific Web 2 lens that you've been operating in, and you have a specific skill set in, if it's, you know, community building, if it's art, if it's music, if it's fashion, you know, whatever it is, your skill set will be sort of in that overlap area of the Venn diagram, that if you can just carve out and dedicate, you know, content, thinking, creation, production into that overlap, I think you'll quickly find yourself owning that category and aligning with other people who also are focused in that category. And so for me, I guess, speaking to my journey, like Friends with Benefits was just the perfect entry point for me, or the gateway point, because like I can speak, even though I'm super new to crypto, I'm very well versed in understanding community building at scale, and how humans come together and organize toward shared goals, and the infrastructure and org design that it takes to get there and to align those incentives. Crypto just unveiled a whole new set of tools that I didn't even know existed. And so it was just like, once that clicked for me, it was like, oh, I shouldn't be speaking to more crypto people about why, or I should be speaking more to people from that world on like why crypto is relevant. And then that immediately sort of positions myself in a way of like just having a unique, I think, insight or perspective. By no means is like an explicit leader, just having a specific vantage point. So I think, yeah, to other people who are looking to break in or already in, but trying to figure out like, where do I play, or what space I exist within, I think it's about, what does that overlap look like in terms of a previous framework or context that you just have a unique skill set in, right? The more niche, the better, in my opinion. Like if you are like an incredible coffee connoisseur, like find a way to tell that story and how that overlaps with like blockchain, and like figure out something that like actually meets the needs of a set of community members. So I think that understanding that overlap, and then going very specific on like community building and org design, and then, you know, obviously just timing it a bit with the market, like now DAOs are like, everyone's talking about DAOs, was sort of like the for me, like the little recipe or cocktail of like finding my footing within this industry.
If I could ask a question to you guys from this vantage point of kind of one, being thought leaders in this space, but also running this community that you hold, you know, really near and dear, and the community is so important of the people who are a part of it. A second order effect of you guys bringing so many people into this ecosystem and getting them excited about the space is there are probably a good number of people who are being highly speculative and just viewing FWB as a financial asset that they want to be a part of. And so how do you kind of filter through growing the value of that community from a financial perspective, but also making sure that you're attracting the right people and getting them in the door, and then also not missing the people who might not have you know, the financial buy-in but want to be a part of it?
I'll take that one first, and then Zhang would love some commentary. It might be a counterintuitive answer, but I think the way you grow the financial value of the community is by not focusing on the financial value of the community. When I'm onboarding someone into FWB, I never talk about the token price. I never talk about the valuation or the cost or whatever it might be. You know, really focus on the people. And I think the more that you can really shift the frame of mind away from like, hey, this is a token that has a financial value, to, hey, this is a community of amazing people and you can work with them on a day-to-day basis, I think the easier that becomes. More specifically, I think trying to point people into areas where they can contribute meaningfully is really, really effective. So it's not really beneficial for me to kick someone tokens and then just drop them in a general chat and be like, good luck, here's like what you can do. If I'm onboarding someone to the community, I really want to sit with them and say, hey, here are 3 or 4 different pockets of this community that you can start adding value to. That's not to say that you need to hop in and start doing it today, but have this on your radar, you know, pay attention here. And my ambition is, if I'm helping someone get into this community, it's that I have high conviction that they can actually add meaningful value in some way, shape, or form. So I think it starts out, like Zhang was saying, just familiarizing yourself with the community, putting GM in the Discord chat, popping in, giving an intro, something very basic. But beyond that, really showing them that if they put in the time and effort to work for this community, they can earn tokens, which have that financial value. Once someone earns those tokens, I think that they're able to participate in the upside of this community, but they have a very different frame of mind. And as the community starts to do well, you notice that those are the biggest cheerleaders for its success, because they're the ones who actually helped create that value in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's all really solid framing, Coop. And I think the only thing I would add would be, for me, one of the most helpful framing around thinking about token price when building and operating a DAO was something that fully allocated and Tina shared in a conversation, which was that token price is essentially dictated by the right people who are value aligned holding your token over a long period of time. And once it was like simplified that clearly to me, I was like, oh, this is fascinating. It's just about really making sure that the right people hold your token through ideally earning, because then that signals that they're value aligned or they're down to put in the work, and that they view it significantly more as an equity versus a currency, right? An equity being something you hold that accrues value over a long period of time. And then to ensure that the vision, values, and purpose of your organization is crystal clear, so that the holder can verify why they're holding checked against that vision. And if they're still in alignment with that, then they hold. If they're not, if that trust is broken, then they sell, right? It's quite simple. And so once I started viewing it like that, it was about ensuring that all of the contributors you onboard, all the people you choose to work with, all the desired members that apply are as close to an overlap of the organization's vision and values and that individual's vision and values. And that was why at FWB, we put in place a membership committee, which was essentially our actual set of community members who elected into being the first filter review. So everyone who joins FWB has to apply in, not explicitly based on their like professional qualifications, but essentially like, what are your values and what are you looking to get out of the space? What are you looking to contribute to the space? How do you want to participate? And that community of community members self-selects the future community members in a way that like we designed as almost like a self-reinforcing mechanism to ensure that everyone who joined put in a little bit of skin in the game, right? They filled out an application, they bought the tokens, so that they're much less likely to drop in and be like, oh, this isn't really my space, sell and like leave, right? So I think that function first off of like ensuring that there's value alignment between the token holder and the community member. And like, there will always be speculation that sits in and around that. But I think if you can focus on that core and build over a long-term horizon, eventually I think the tokenomics will favor the people who held over a long period of time. And then I think to Cooper's second point, and Gabby, your framing around like contribution and earning, that to me is like the biggest unsolved area. And I think how you address the social token paradox thing that you've so succinctly and beautifully written about, which is this like, the social token narrative still hasn't really figured out, if everyone's working together, token price goes up, and then that like blocks out future contributors. And then eventually that, that hurdle to join becomes higher and higher. And I think what needs to be solved is how do we create stronger, scalable, and repeatable contribute to earn functions so that people can participate in these DAOs through earning, which is essentially the strongest form of skin in the game and the strongest signal of value and vision alignment. And I don't have an explicit answer for that yet, but I think that that's something where right now it's done in a very non-scalable way. It's very much like the right people who create the right content or products or design experiences, like us reaching out and then bringing them in a very manual basis. I think the evolution of like 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 specifically will be when we can create clear, explicit and repeatable functions, sort of like, playing to earn, functions and things like YGG, where it's a lot more like easy for someone to quickly on ramp, contribute sets of tasks to accrue tokens to then participate in that tokenized community.
I love that. I want to, address a quick comment here in the chat that I think is really pertinent here. Almost every DAO that I've seen uses some kind of token-based governance, and I think that's a fundamental weakness that introduces aspects of a capital-based economy when DAOs are better built around a reputation-style economy. Gabby, I think one thing that you and I are really heavily aligned on is this idea of curation. I really love the post that you put out about the importance of curation, its role in the ecosystem, and specifically related to reputation. I think that there's a lot of takeaways here. Would you mind spending a minute or two talking about the thesis of that post, maybe how it ties into DAOs, and then more specifically, this contribution to earn framework?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually start by talking about the post I wrote about social tokens, which Zhang kind of touched on quickly, this social token paradox. And this was actually a solution that I thought about. And of course, we're so early. I always say that 99% of DAOs don't even exist yet. And so, a lot of these solutions we just haven't built yet. And so, it's great to be talking about these things and starting the conversation so that we can encourage that kind of innovation. But generally, the thesis of the piece is today, decentralized communities are primarily valued proportionally to their token price. So when the value of the token goes up, so does the value of the community. And when the token price is higher, the community naturally becomes more desirable to join. The problem here is with that mental model, these tokenized communities are incentivized to uphold exclusivity. And kind of as the comment suggests, I think that's a fundamental weakness. So if you work backwards from here, if you want your community to be valuable, you need your community's token to go up in price, which makes sense based on the original model that we laid out. But to make the token go up in price, you can either increase the price of the token, or you can decrease the number of tokens available to prospective members. And either way, that restricts access to the community. When we think about crypto as an ecosystem, generally, like if we create a world of more exclusive groups and communities based on more exclusive assets, like, is that the solution that we really wanted to build for? And I don't think so. And so I definitely agree with the comment in the chat that is a weakness. And so for me, one of the suggestions that I brought up in that post was we really should be baking in on-chain reputation and on-chain data of what you do, especially particularly what you do in these communities. And so, of course, we're so early in it. And so it'll be interesting to see how that actually gets baked in. But I absolutely agree that a reputation style economy makes a lot more sense. From a curation standpoint, I'm curious what you mean by that, Cooper. If you mean, curation within the community or on the outside of choosing which community to join.
I think it's both. I think that it's such a wide spectrum. I just love this idea of being able to signal towards value and earning from that signaling. And then specifically related to reputation, as you're seen as more of a curator in this economy, I think that those earning opportunities become easier and easier. And so really just pulling out that contributing to a community doesn't have to be technical. It doesn't have to be deep work on doing something for writing every day or something like that. There is this sort of hazy middle ground that I think we're still figuring out, where there's curation incentives baked into the space more broadly. And I'm really just curious to get your thoughts on really how that manifests basically, or for DAOs specifically, how do you see people starting to curate DAOs moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating to see that there's a DAO for, basically pretty much everything right now. We've got Flamingo DAO for NFTs, FWB as a social community, Forefront for media and publishing, Party DAO builds software, Gitcoin funds the open web. We've got all of these different, spectrums, and it's really across all industries. We have these communities that are working to kind of push forward this next frontier. And so whatever your skills or interests are, you can curate what that experience yourself looks like. And I totally agree with you. If you're not a developer, maybe focus on writing, or if you don't know how to write, then maybe, build this software to push forward these projects. And then, being able to really authentically vouch for the communities that you are a part of, and curating kind of what communities you care about is the best way to bring other people into the fold from this really authentic perspective. There's a really cool analogy that my partner Jared at TCG has written about. And so I wanted to make sure I got it in at some point, because I think this is a really good point of curation and focusing on authentically what matters to you. Jared wrote this piece where he basically said a lot of digital communities today are like the McMansions of the internet. With a lot of communities today, they're, absolutely amazing. Communities have really worked together to create real substance. And this comes through curation and, being very discerning about the communities that you do want to be a part of and spend your time in, because there is a fixed amount of time that we have in a day and communities that you can really contribute to. The analogy that he gives is back in the 80s, developers would go out to a random suburb in Jersey or something like that, and build a complex or build 50 homes. And they would look really nice and they would be really attractive to new buyers, but those homes would lack a local newspaper or a bar or a downtown or any semblance of community or culture actually within that physical area. And so once the aura of that newness goes away, people kind of shrug and they're like, okay, what now? And in some cases people stay because it's a home, it has four walls and a roof, but in a lot of times those communities become abandoned. And so it's on the organizers of the communities to create really easy ways for people to contribute, but it's also on the user to figure out, what do you want out of this, right? The same way in NFTs, it's don't buy things for the price going up, buy what you actually love. Same thing with DAOs, don't join for the price of the token going up, but you should join the communities that you love.
I love that. And I think the reason why I'm excited about both you guys being on this panel is you're so uniquely suited at this intersection of culture and crypto. I think that specifically that tie-in is super, super special to me. And so Zhang, I know you had a comment there, so I want to let you get that in first. But the question I have for you is, when you think about working for a DAO, I think a big piece of that is curating the culture of that community, making sure that the vibe is right, that people are satisfied, and that they feel like they are aligned in how the community is growing. Would love just like any comments you have around like curating the culture for a community like FWB.
Yeah, I'll happy to share that. I think just to jump into something Gabby was writing earlier, I think about the exclusivity in a lot of these different spaces, and how, yes, there's obviously things that detract from it, and ways that we need to create more open, sort of permissionless access. But I think at least in this early stage, we actually have a problem where I think too many people are contributing to too many different DAOs without focusing on one specific thing where they can drive a lot of value. I think the exclusivity reinforces that like the focus, which I think is really important to like innovate and push things forward. And the best analogy in which I think about a lot of these DAOs is really like internet cities, in that with the social token paradox and its relationship to token and price, you can take a parallel like New York City, where there's a high cost of living affiliated with New York City, right? It's different than other cities because of the cultural capital, or because of the culture that it attracts: restaurants, museums, that, you know, the different variables that lead to someone saying, I'm willing to spend more money to exist in this space. I think there needs to be stronger and more sophisticated diversification of access points, is I think how we really solve this long term. Is not this, you know, FWB is you hold 75 tokens and then you get into the Discord. That like very linear framing will evolve, and we're pushing to evolve that, where eventually there'll be dozens and dozens of different tiers where you can hold 0.1 FWB to access this specific part of the neighborhood. And if you want, you can spend more money if you want to live specifically in Manhattan, specifically in the Upper East Side, because maybe that's what aligns with your specific current financial or social situation, right? So I think of a lot of these DAOs needing to frame things with urban planning perspectives and sort of city critical theory around like, what are access points? How do we allow people to like tour? Like how do we allow tourists to navigate through the city versus the people who want to specifically live in them? So I think that was just one framing that the DAOs need to sort of push you to really incorporate into how they design their tokenomics. That was helpful for me in thinking about friends with benefits. Cooper, I guess your next question around like, how do you create culture within DAOs? Is it specifically like, what are maybe like tools or insights that other community builders can use in like setting their culture, or you want to refine that maybe?
Yeah, I think it's two-sided. I think it's one, like, what are the practical implementations of that in Discord and the tooling that supports that? And then more broadly, how do you listen to a community? Like, what does that look like, and what's the way in which that's actually enacted?
Yeah. So I think if I would break them into like step-by-steps, I think it's one, I think the strength of a community is the strength of the one-on-one connections that members within those communities create. So as a community builder, I think it's about like doing the one-on-ones, right? Like if people are writing interesting things, if people are critiquing interesting things, establish one-on-one human-to-human relationships to really create that network where, at least in the beginning, you're centralizing a lot of that different data and input from different community members. Once you feel like you've got a strong enough of sort of a vision or an understanding of where the pulse of a specific community is, shifting from one-to-one to sort of one-to-many or many-to-many, right? Starting to create and bring those one-to-one relationships into town hall formats, group conversations, audio, using the tooling of Discord, using the tools of Clubhouse to get people together, start having those different, those one-on-one people meeting each other, right? And allowing people to hop on stage to sort of share their vision and their perspective. That's that really exciting delta point when you start to see the community begin to take on a life of its own. And then I believe it's then harnessing and starting to document those natural feelings and perspectives that those communities are taking on. And so then once it starts to, you feel like that pendulum starts to swing between founder, leader with a vision into actually a community starting to have their own interpretation of like, what does FWB mean to them, or what does insert DAO mean to you? Then it's about someone who's really good at sort of the vision purpose work to start to like distill some of those thoughts into writing. So we use tools like FigJam, Mural, where we allow community members, we start doing brainstorm sessions where community members can start to submit, here's what FWB means to me from a vision perspective. We start to ask provocative questions. If FWB were a city, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What would your friends look like in this space? Like things that allow for community members to start to really input and break down what that space, what their relationship to that space is. And then it's sort of distilling that and codifying that into sort of an explicit vision, values, code of conduct that you then use to govern your community, internet city, with elected governance. And so I think for folks who are whatever stage are in that process, it's about listening. It's about listening to specific members within those spaces, and then shifting from one-to-one into group conversations with ideally people who've done this work before, to start to like get all this in writing, so that language can be used to then scale and enforce those cultural norms that a community sets for themselves.
I think the most interesting part of that answer is you didn't mention one on-chain action that's being taken. And I think that's really important here, because when we think of DAOs, we inherently think that this is a Web3 world. There's a lot of cool crypto stuff going on. There's governance, there's all these token distributions and whatnot. But what I've come to notice, and what I think you highlighted well there, is that a lot of the success of these DAOs is based on social skills and human coordination. And so when you think about the tools that are being used to do that, you don't need an on-chain transaction to tell whether or not someone's happy in a community. You just need to spend time with them. I think that's why this whole maturity scale of what I'm noticing is that the DAOs that are doing the best today are really hiring on the human side. You know, they're putting people into leadership positions of, you know, vibe checking the community, doing things like curation, doing things like membership onboarding. I think that's a strong signal that, you know, maybe it's more specific to F3B because of its makeup, but I think more broadly across the board, the success of your community is going to be directly related to those who are helping people feel comfortable within it. And so looking to hire out for the human side of things is actually really, really effective. I want to, answer a question that's in the chat here that Kartik threw really quick. Is there an argument that being part of DAOs is a zero-sum choice? I'll take this first, and if anyone has comments, I'd love to hear them. I would say that right now we're in a very positive sum landscape of DAOs. I think that people are very happy contributing to many DAOs. They're very happy and open, sharing information with one another. You know, I'm personally in a bunch of DAOs. I know that both of you two are also in multiple DAOs. I do think we're in a bit of a utopia state right now, where this is going to be the case for, let's call it the next couple of years, but at some point it'll start to get a little bit more competitive. And so while we're in this heyday, I think it's important to recognize that there is value in contributing to many DAOs, but to Zhang's point, you will earn and create the most value by doubling down on one specific DAO. And so what that looks like is getting token allocations in these communities, really finding a high social role in that community. So beyond being a contributor, being seen as a leader and someone of influence, I think the compounding effects that come from being seen as leader in a specific DAO is greater than contributing to all of them. And so for people who are looking to get a jump in DAOs, I think it makes sense to join a bunch of them at first, as we talked about earlier, get a cultural fit for it. But more specifically, once you find that one that's really important to you, really do everything in your power to have a meaningful role, stake, and reputation in that community, because that's how you're going to learn the most and be able to do the most meaningful work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, there's problems with DAOs today. They're not perfect. And I think the reason that it's still such a positive environment is because it's so early. And so it's so exciting to be in the space. But something we touched on earlier is Zhang kind of used the word tourist in, jumping among DAOs. And I personally think that that's going to change in the future once kind of this heyday settles down. I think there's going to be a more difficult entry point into different communities, but there's also going to be a more different exit point. The same way, if you live in a house, if you're going to move, it requires some amount of thinking, and you can't just click from one to the next. And so I think it's going to be more kind of productized to really double down on these communities. And so like you said, Cooper, it's a great time now to get involved and see what's in the space. And it's so early that it's so awesome to know what's happening and what people are working on and devoting their lives to. But as it settles down, it's going to be so important to focus on what you truly care about, because I think, even it's going to be baked into the structure that people are focused on a fixed number of DAOs or communities.
I also think, to add to the zero sum versus positive sum framing, the biggest innovation I see with DAOs is actually in the corporate structure. And I use that loose term because it's obviously not corporate structure, but like the way that DAOs can actually play together as like parallel economies, as opposed to, in traditional startup landscape and different startups, like the what Gabby mentioned about like the misalignment between user and corporate governance. In the DAO framing, you have new sort of mechanics to be able to do token swaps between DAOs, right? You have the ability to sort of merge DAOs or have DAOs play with each other on sort of seasonal bases, that with the right financial alignment, which to me is like the biggest innovation of DAOs from, let's say, Web2 corporate structures, Web3 corporate structures, is the idea that DAOs can actually begin to partner together, do token swaps, and have community members, where there does feel like a value alignment, actually work together, where both DAOs now want to see both organizations succeed and watch their treasury value go up into the right if the right sort of collaboration is institutionalized. So that to me is what excites me most about how, yes, we're in sort of a bit of a utopian landscape, but I think at least the potential for stronger positive sum scenarios, not between every single DAO, obviously, but between specific DAOs that are value aligned within the space to actually collaborate and work together.
Guys, I want to be cautious that we're coming right up on time here. Sort of in closing thoughts here, I want to leave you with a request from the community. You know, we're at a hackathon right now. We're talking to a bunch of amazing builder and operators. You know, what are some things that you wish you could see from the DAO tooling side of things that would make your life easier?
I just touched on this, so I can hop in, but better onboarding. If there's a structured way of getting involved in a DAO and learning about it before you join and buy in, as a user, that would be helpful for me, but I think it's really needed in this space. And then there's a company I'm talking to that I think is really interesting that's building kind of like a version of Google Docs, but encrypted, where you can sign in with your wallet. And I think there's a really interesting application for DAOs there of being able to kind of collaborate privately within the community.
Yeah, that's similar to, I think, one, better sort of, let's say Web3 DAO-based project management software, so that allowing for community members and leaders within DAOs to coordinate better. Right now, the tool stack is very, I call like bubblegum and scotch tape, where it's like very piecemeal together, but having, you know, different infrastructure for how essentially the distributed and agile nature of Web3, allowing for them to collaborate in sort of quicker fashion. And then I think voting can be significantly improved, right? I think like what Gnosis Guild and Gnosis Safe spun up with Zodiac, their new form of voting software. I think creating way more sophisticated forms to have communities decide and make decisions beyond just one token, one vote, or one person, one vote, or even quadratic voting, which is super complicated for a lot of users, and making it easier to make decisions, like integrating into Discord for quicker voting mechanisms, but really encouraging community members to vote, to get more involved is I think a huge area for innovation as well.
Yeah, double click on both those answers. I think for me, the answer is simple. Make it easier to join DAOs. I think across the board, once you're in a DAO and you're really comfy, it's very nice, but that first leap of getting into that DAO is still very difficult. So small things like onboarding to a Discord channel, being able to sync up your wallet, being able to know that you actually hold assets that have the ability to join DAOs, seeing across DAOs like what's going on and setting up with things. I think right now we're in a very ad hoc nature where all of these DAOs are building custom products to be able to support communication across their communities. And so anything that can be done to make it easier to join and stay up to date with what's happening, I think would be really, really positive. Guys, I want to be conscious we're right at time here. Where can people stay up with you on the internet? Gabby, you're first.
I love Twitter. I'm at Gaby_Goldberg, and I write about digital communities and digital culture at gabby.mirror.xyz.
Twitter as well. Alex Zhang with 2 X's and 2 Z's.
Amazing. And I am Koopa Troopa. Come and find me on Twitter. Come hang out. Discord, Koopa Troopa number 9799. For the Instagram people of the world here in LA, we've been running it up. So Koopa Troopa on Instagram too. Let's keep it going. Kartik, thank you so much for having us, man.
Cooper, Gabby, Alex, thank you so much. And it was an amazing discussion. We'll post those links on the chat too. And yeah, this is great. It'll be great to have you again and dig more.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
you got a
guys.
killer panel up next.
Thanks
I'm
for organizing this.
for it.
See you, everybody.
Yeah.